Anybody to answer that? Okay. Now, so you would go from the Mano, Mane, and Ire, the forces, the primal forces, into their manifestation of Partakai, Partake, and Particum, standing scalar wave grids, and they build up to become chelons, and chelons build up to become chelon codes. Now, there's an interesting place you can take it from that. Okay, you got chelons over here, so this one little sheet can get you through that discussion, okay, when you're teaching people. Now, I'm going to flip back to this. That's too high. That's too high. That's too high, I think. Well, I think it's all right. I'll just move it around like this, okay? Now, so if we get down to a number 2, emanations of Akasha, Partakai, Partake, Particum, chelons of creation. All right, we just talked about that. You would let people know about that, the connection between the Mane, and Ire. It's hard to say fast. And that connection to Partakai, Partake, Particum, and Partakai standing scalar wave grids, which form, chelons and chelon codes. Now, chelons and chelon codes are worthwhile touching on if you're going to teach, any of this, because these become other things. When I'm going to talk about number 3 in a minute first, because this is extremely important to bring to people. This is more of the consciousness stuff again. All right, we talked about structure and substance and order and those things. But here we're bringing the consciousness that it's all about, like the consciousness, the motivation, the intention, the desire behind the structures. So we'll get into that. But when we get down here, this is a part that's going to be important. And this little thing, even on this one page, there's enough in that little description that's enough to teach somebody just coming into it, where they will have a very important piece of information that will help them understand more stuff later, that they'll come across other things later. Oh, that's where that goes. Okay, I get that. Like when they want to understand DNA. So we'll go from up there to the things we just talked about. Then we can go into the consciousness of this, all right? We have these structures, the primal substance being Partakai, Partake, Particum, the force behind it, the Mane, the Ire, and the Mano. They form chelons. These are part of structure. All right, goes into structure. Then, the all-oneness. This is a motivation. This is the reality of what's taking place. This is behind all the structure and behind all the manifestation, what the is really is. The is consciousness that has intention. When we talk about this scalar wave grid that's called a time matrix, that's formed by Partakai, Partake, and Partakai coming, Partakai, Partake, and Particum coming together. You have to say it slower. Coming together to form chelons and forming these massive scalar standing wave grids. What is that? That is a unified field, right? It's a unified field of what? Partakai, Partake, Particum? Yes, primal units of consciousness. Okay? So, the unified field is, when you take it to its purest and core form, it is a field of Mano, Mane, and Ire. All right? That takes the form of Partakai, Partake, Particum, standing scalar waves. All right. Now, this means that all this structure we've been talking about, all of these primal substance units, I begin to feel like biologists that just dissect things, these are living. We've talked about it, but there's a feeling that goes with this. These are living forces of consciousness. These are people that take the shape of scalar waves. So do we. We are actually made of scalar waves. So we consider ourselves conscious and sentient. We consider ourselves beings that have our own ideas and desires and things we'd like to create and feelings we have about things. The Mane, the Mano, and the Ire also have their own feeling and intention and thought. It's thought different from us because they don't need a brain, because they're forces that work a little differently as far as their consciousness is immediate. Their creation is immediate. But if we begin to understand and start to relate to the structure that we've learned and relate to the energy stuff we've learned about energy and its movement and where it goes and what shape it takes. But now it's time to get to know who it is, to get to know the who of the what and the where. And this is what we will learn with the primal forces. All right? The all-oneness. At-one-ment. What is that? At-one-ment. Being at one with something. no separation between you and it. This is actually the true state of existence. We see separation between, objects in space only because we have certain parts of our scalar waves turned off, so we can't see those parts of them. They don't pop into holographic expression. The whole hologram is a thought form. And it can seem really strange. The mental body can say, okay, hologram is a thought form. Yeah, okay, I can understand that. There's enough physics behind it. Yeah, it could make sense. But the emotional body goes, huh? I'm stuck here. If I go walk in front of a car, I'm going to get splattered. When my tooth hurts, it hurts. I'm in a body. It is physical. It is a physical body. It's a refracted light pattern, actually. You have light refracting all over the place within the true form that you are. The true form that you are is standing scalar waves, part chi, part k, and part cum. So the true form that you are is Mano, Mane, and Ire. This is you. These forces are you, but they are also the universe. These are where you and universe, you and planet, you and other people, you and galaxy, you and universe, you and God are at one mint. There is no separation between you. You are the same stuff and the same who. Now, we get into it one mint. There is one spirit. That's all. Just one. One spirit, one self. One self that wears many masks, but it's one self. In all creation, one self. Even the Mana, the Mane, and the Ire. They are one self. Looking at each other. Deciding, okay, self, let's do something with ourselves. You go over there and look back this way. I'll go over here and look over this way. And we'll be able to see it as if we're not the same self. Neat idea. There's some of the games that the consciousness plays. The consciousness of God is very playful. It's creative. Did you ever watch a creative kid where they don't even care what they're painting? Give them a set of paints and some paper in a quiet room where they don't think anybody's watching. And if they really feel that creative spirit, they'll make all sorts of stuff. And at first they don't really care what they're making. They just are expressing. There's a playfulness and a passion about creation that is the natural characteristic of Source, of God. And the Mano, Mane, and Ire embody that, different pieces of it, different aspects of it. But passion is allowed. It's supposed to be where that energy is, where you feel passion, where you feel, oh, there's a lot of energy behind that. I'd really like to go do that. Now, if you get a real surge of energy on it, it can be coming from two places, really, the whole you, or the piece of you that's twisted and refracting and bouncing around in you from your shadow. Now, if you look deeply, you'll find the shadow stuff, you might find an impulse to do something, or almost an urge where your body seems to want to drag you with it. That's your shadow. There's another kind of passion that the shadow can't feel. And it's a spiritual thing where you just, it's like you feel this energy come into you, and you just feel it. I know, you've probably felt this. I don't think there's anybody that hasn't felt it, at least in a moment. Maybe it was in childhood. Some people it was in infancy. But some people working with meditation and things are finding pieces of this. The trick is to keep it there all the time, because it usually goes out as fast as it came in. This is the Mano, the Ire, and the Mane, moving in the body. Just a tiny bit, because right now it's hard for them to move in there because of the mutations in the DNA. Imagine what it would be like to have that passion all the time. There'd be so much passion becomes something else. It becomes isness. It becomes a state of absolutely engaged disconnection. You don't care anymore. You can create anything in the universe. You find at a certain point, you can create anything. So you find that, now that I can create anything or have anything or be anything or do anything, maybe I'll just rest a while. All of a sudden, the desire to have to create goes away. So what happens is creation becomes something that it's only done because you want to at the moment. There's no more have-tos. Shadows do have-tos. Shadows live in panic land, in lack land, where there's always not enough of something, or always too much of something else, and there's always something that isn't right that has to be fixed, so you're never where you need to be right now and here. You can never be, because you're not what you should be, what you want to be, where you want to be, with who you want to be. This is the shadow space. When we get into the Mano, the Ire, and the Mane space, we'll progressively open into our bodies. This means we'll not only be able to think about it, we'll be able to start to feel it with our bodies. with our emotions. It's a state of at-one-ment. And you'll get little bursts of it at first, and then the reversals shift back in from the planetary grids. Where'd it go? I thought, great, 10 minutes ago, where'd it go? It was a rush, where is it? And then the shell will go, it's not there anymore. I'm lacking it. Oh no, right? But if you work with the technologies that we're going to learn today and the ones that will come after, you'll progressively be able to embody more and more of the experiential state of the natural at-one-ment. Because see, what's so funny, and funny in a sad way, is that all of the things that we would all like to be able to experience, and everybody has their own little twist on what their particular thing is that they'd like to know and feel and have and be. It all exists right now. People that feel, I just wish I had love. Where isn't it? We breathe it. It moves through our bodies all the time. The problem is we can't recognize it because we become desensitized to those feelings because of what's shut down in our cells. We will begin to find that all the things we thought were lacking are here and always have been. We just forgot. So we'll begin to feel what it means to be in at-one-ment. We're that panicky little shadow thing that everybody gets a kick of it here and there. I mean, if not, usually something comes from you in the hologram and says, here, we're going to take your house away from you. This big back tax bill came up, and if you don't come up with $20,000, you don't have a house anymore. All of a sudden, your hologram of peace is shattered by one little piece of paper in the mail. You know what I mean? Oh my God! Shadow goes, oh, I'm going to be homeless. There comes a time when you don't manifest that stuff anymore, because we're still manifesting it. And what's tricky about all this is, no matter how much we get control of our minds right now, we are still going to manifest the victim-victimizer drama as long as these implants are in the planetary grids, because they keep putting those reversals, which are static interface patterns, back into our DNA. So we can clear our DNA, and it gets dirty again as soon as we're on planet. As soon as we flash back on, there it is again. What we're going to do with the exercises that we're going to learn with radial body healing, radial body activation, we're going to progressively use the Akasha currents, the highest levels of them, to reset and hold in place the natural form of the lowest ones and then move it up. We'll be moving down and up at the same time, so progressively clearing the radial body levels, which means progressively we will be purging out and getting rid of that victim-victimizer thing that keeps messing up what we're trying to manifest. Progressively we'll get our shadow back, and we'll find out it's our friend. And that's good, because you can't just cut your shadow out and leave it someplace. It's going to hold you back and draw you back. So, anyway, get into the oneness, the one spirit, one God, one self, one love. There is one love. It is all love. And it is pure love. There are people here on this planet and others that can act very unlovingly. It is not because there isn't love there, and it's not because they're not even made out of love. They're made out of love too. They just don't know it anymore. All right. The intention of all creation, the first intention, even after this, it was divided into three to have three separate intentions so externalization could take place. The first intention, and the thing that you will always go back to, if you're going to go back through all of the currents of creation and back through all the levels and back through the Manet and the Ire and the Manal, there would be one last thing that you would expand back into when you get into full at-one-ment with God, and that is absolute love. You are at harmony with everything because everything is made out of you. It's not separate at all. You're in a state of vibrational harmonization. So these are some of the things that we're growing toward. These are some of the things that we're not just going to be able to protect ourselves from frequency fences and unpleasant things on the planet. These are some of the expansions of consciousness that we'll begin to embody. And when we do, it's kind of funny, because once you get there, it's like what I talked about yesterday about going to inner earth. Oh, yeah, I remember here. Oh, well, that's right. I was thinking it was going to be this, oh, wow, something I never experienced before. Oh, wow. But when you get there, you realize you always were there. And it's just kind of like you scratch your head and go, yeah, I get it. Right? Where you realize that you were perceiving in two places at the same time. The part of you that had the filters and that didn't know about the other part anymore, and the part that knew the game all along. So it's a very interesting process of rediscovering yourself, and as you do, realizing you knew yourself all along anyway. So, and eventually we will go back up into where we recognize each other in the same ways. It gets funny sometimes, especially when they don't recognize you. When you all know you're one being, and you look at each other, you can fight with each other. There's people that have all sorts of energies between each other. Excuse me, don't you remember? We're the same person. You go, what do you mean? I'm not you. I don't like you. I don't like the way you dress. I don't like the way you look. I don't like what you do with your life. But we're still one person. Another thing we'll discover as we go back, God, and that means us too, has a really funny sense of humor. A very, very good sense of humor. The universe is very creative and very funny. Humor is allowed, it's permitted, it's absolutely essential. And you'll find you get to laugh at yourself. And the more you can laugh at yourself, the more you can laugh at everything around you. And the more love you will feel for people who are acting wacky. Okay? If people who are acting crazy, I mean, you see like countries going dropping bombs on each other's head. Okay? Now that can get really distressing if you're looking at it from there. But once you start to understand how energy shifts and the fact that it's all eternal, and you start to get another perspective, and after a while it is just funny. It's funny in yourself when you start to catch yourself in victimizer games. You go, oh, here we go again. It's like, I thought I got rid of you. Shadow, come here. I want to talk to you outside. It's one of the things to do. That's a very good way to handle it, too. If you find yourself getting into it with somebody, think, shadow, okay. Now, of course, they have one, too. You're not blaming anybody here. You're not saying, oh, it's all my fault. Of course not. You say, I'm having a shadow issue. Excuse me. Go talk to your shadow. And when you talk to your shadow, the best thing to do, because shadows don't like to be rational or reasonable at all. That's not what they're about. They're a chaotic pattern of our own consciousness. So the best thing to do, shadows are like babies. And one of the best ways to put a frantic infant to sleep so it gets calm again is to sing to it. Especially if you sing songs that calm its frequencies down. That's what these songs are about. That's what the songs are about. So when we are working with this one technique, it's going to take me a while. I'm going to have to read this piece by piece, these sound tones that we're going to get in the exercise today. But if you can memorize this is the ultimate lullaby. All right, you can use this and with the Lyra song, the Song of Lyra. That's another powerful one, by the way. If anybody's like really played with that, this one triggers your Maharic seal to activate instantly. All right, now it doesn't. If you don't activate your Maharic seal the regular ways first, it won't do that. You have to, get your body used to doing Maharic seal. But the Song of Lyra, the Christos song, will immediately pull up your Maharic pillar, at least temporarily. All right, these other songs that we're going to learn, and they're a mouthful. Song of Lyra looked easy compared to some of these. There's only 4 lines. There's only 4 lines. But there are so many little syllables of sounds in those lines, and some of them are so similar that you go, wait a minute. So I'll save that discussion for later. You'll see what I mean. And before we get to the song, we're going to find out what exactly those sound tones mean, where they go. Okay. So anyway, we get down through the oneness, the one mind, the one form, the one thought, the one song, the one light, the one heart, the one mind, the one form, the primal life field of conscious, living, eternal, unconditional love. That is what the core substance of everything is. If we can begin to first get our minds used to what that might mean, then we can start to prepare our bodies for what that feels like. And that's when you go beyond words. That's when you struggle to find words that can even touch around the edges of that feeling. When the life forces start to wake up in you, the living force of God starts to wake up in you. And I don't mean the living force of God, hell, come down like they do in some of the churches, like, and you make sure you listen to your preacher and you do your Bible, that kind of thing. It's not, this isn't the kind of force, all right? These are like life forces, smack, right, that they're talking about. We're talking about life forces, the power of you and God being at one with each other. It's what they're trying to get the other way. But they're like using the force of the Bible is like, to beat people over the head with. They're using the wrong kind of force. But when we start to feel this in our bodies, we'll become where we need words less and less. But you'll also find a perplexing thing happening where you have so much you want to tell everybody, and so much you want to let them know, and because you know what would help and you know what would make them feel better, and you know you can have such a good time knowing this together, and you realize you can't find a word that can even explain it to yourself. Every word you try is like this big because the feeling is this big, right? But that's part of the game. It's time. I'm 10 minutes past time? Oh, okay. Okay. Okay, thank you. Yeah, I've been, I was just letting you know. Thank God for him, because when I get going, I don't see clocks. They like hyperspace for me into another dimension or something, because I really tune it out. They're set up in there already and everything?
It's ready to go.
Okay, it's all ready to go. When we get back, we'll move through this a little bit faster. We'll pick up on Chelons of Creation and God-Fire Alphabet. That's an important part of it. Enjoy your lunch. We left off somewhere around the all-oneness and before the cosmic light bulbs and sound bites. Okay. Now, if we can bring back into focus, what we were talking about was how the forces, the primal forces of the Mana, the Mane, and the Ire move through the structures we know, become the structures that we know, the Partakai, Partakai, and Particum. They build up to become the Partakai scalar standing wave grids that are the templates for the time matrix and for everything that enters the time matrix. We've talked about the oneness with the one spirit, one God, one self, and one of all those other things. In other words, it's all one. We've talked about what it feels like a bit to carry that oneness in your body, to carry the one-ment with you, where you can still have a body and know the separation, but also know the one-ment at the same time, which is really the state that we're looking for. When we go into a state that would allow us to be, let's say, a fully activated avatar being, a fully active avatar being has the ability to stay in the hologram and take themselves out whenever they want to, and they hold both states of consciousness in the same place, in the same space. They know they are separate in relation to the dynamics of the hologram, but they know the hologram is like a stage play that's being put on, and really it's all the same person just playing all the roles. So there's a really unique state of consciousness that we find when we begin to go into the at-one-ment space. The key to the at-one-ment is the primal force, and the primal force takes the form, first of all, as the Mana, the Mane, and the Ire. As we move into combining what we know about structure with what we're learning now about the forces, we will find that manifesting itself as the structure of the 15-dimensional time matrix, of the Cathara grids, of the structures that we've learned, that the primal forces break themselves down. All right, just like the Mana was one force, and out of that force it took part of itself and made two. It made the Ire and the Mane. Well, those forces continue to break themselves down into smaller aspects of consciousness, smaller forces. When we combined the knowledge of the structure with Cathara grids and dimensionalization and all of that kind of thing with the knowledge of the consciousness fields of the primal forces, we find there are a bunch of different currents of consciousness, a living life stream that comes down, how we get the frequencies from the highest spaces of at-one-ment into the tiny spaces of the illusion of separation is through a stepping down process where the consciousness itself, one stream of consciousness breaks into two, then each one of those two will break into two. And there's a format that coming down through the Cathara grid. Now in Cathara we learned about the two Cathara grids. There are 24 points. The first cosmic Cathara grid that forms the primal sound fields and goes into the primal light fields, and then the other Cathara grid that goes from D12 down to D1. There are primal force currents that literally follow that path and break themselves down. So there is a different set of currents for each density level and for each dimensional level. When we get into studying radial body, we begin to find out exactly where they are, and that's where we find out about prana and mana and all the other different funny names that you hear here and there in metaphysical literature. You get to see where they fit. And it's in the combining of these. This is what language is actually really about. All languages that have ever existed originally came out of the original patterns of the divine blueprint and the consciousness currents and the sound tones or the vibrations that those sound tones made. So they're like the word mana. It was a sound tone that came out of the larger mane. When we have eros as one of the currents, it came out of the larger ire. All of the words that we use are actually little tiny sound bites of the original larger forces of consciousness that are alive all around us. When we begin to use the ancient sound tones, the whole tones, the tones of the words themselves, the vibrational patterns themselves, we call more and more of that living life force that's all around us all the time. We call more of it into our embodiment. And with that comes more of our at-one-ment. That's why we use, in any of our technologies, we're always using sound and we're always using symbols. Symbols are patterns that we'll talk about in a minute. They're patterns called geomancies. And geomancies do a certain type of thing. They hold a mathematical pattern of intention, the intention of creation that was held originally when Source created itself as the Mane, Manau, and Ire. That intention gets downstepped, and it would be in the form of what we would call mathematics here. So geomancies actually hold, they're living forms of the life force, the forces, that take on the shape of the symbols. When we look at symbols and we use symbols in the work that we do, we see just a symbol on a piece of paper. But what that symbol actually is in its whole state, it is a being. It is a part of one of the consciousness streams. So when we begin to work with the symbols, again, we're co-creating. We're not just creating or saying, okay, I'm going to make something do something by using this something. What you're doing is you're entering a relationship of co-creation. You're calling upon the power of the symbol and the part of you that is manifest as that particular mathematical program. There's an intimacy that comes when we begin to realize that symbols are alive. And that can really be sometimes best understood by realizing that we are all symbols. When we look at each other or ourselves in the mirror, we're not seeing the whole reality or truth of what we are. We're seeing what this thing we call ourself appears to be under certain conditions. We see a body shape, it's a bipedal body shape, it looks like a thing that we call human. This is the symbol level of ourselves. Well, when we see the geomancies that we're using, the symbol codes that we're using, this is their outer body, what they look like on the outside. But they are conscious, thinking forms of the primal forces that are intelligent and sentient on their own. The symbols can teach us many, many things. They're things that that belong to us in the first place, because actually we exist as these symbols. It's not as if the consciousness of the symbols is like an archangel or something you worship over there. It's not. The symbols are part of the consciousness that everything down here in the lower dimensional fields are made of, including you. So you have a part of yourself that exists in those symbol forms. There's an intimacy in working with the technologies when you realize that from the start. When you realize you're using more than just, say, a dry technology. Okay, I do this and it makes this happen. This is like, oh, hello. Who are you? You're a part of me and I'm a part of you. What are we going to create together? There's an awareness, there is a backflow of energy that if you move a thought toward one of these symbols and learn to quiet yourself and receive, it will communicate and it'll talk back. So they're interactive. That's something that it's not just the Manau codes that we'll be using in this workshop. In fact, we're going to be given one. They seem to give us one every workshop, that they're doing Vecca codes in, and have us work with that one for a while. This one's going to be, I thought they were going to save this one for last, but the one they're going to give us, and it's going to be tomorrow morning. That's one of the ones that we're doing on the beach. We're introducing the visual part of what we're doing the sound part of today and this afternoon. But it's going to be the one that applies to density 1, dimensions 1, 2, and 3. I figured they'd work their way all the way down, and eventually the final one we'd get to where we could actually maybe start moving things in, where we could see it in our field of immediate perception. But they're starting with this one. So this ought to be interesting when we begin to use the living consciousness of the mathematical programs of the Manau and the Ire and the Mane as they exist here within our bodies. Once we find that connection in our own bodies and find that piece of the Manau or the primal force alive within us, we start to have what's called a co-resonance, or a vibration that is not just about us. We start to be able to feel as part of our own self, the trees, the part of the trees that hold that same consciousness, the part of the grass, the part of the planet, the part of the sky. We start to be able to feel the parts of each other. So we begin to feel the at-one-ment. I remember, I have little memory clips of certain time frames when we were involved in mystical schools. And particularly like in the King Arthur period, there was a lot of this going on, where certain ones of us were entrusted as keepers of the ancient knowledge, and we worked with the elemental forces. We were in training then for what we would need to do here at this time frame. We knew we would be, all of us would be incarnating back. But we could go out in the middle of a storm. I have a very clear image, and I feel it. Like every time I remember this memory clip, it's like a Kodak moment from the incarnational photo album, where we were playing with the sword, the Excalibur sword. And the Excalibur sword was actually the staff instrument. It was one of the Stargate tools that the guardian races had left here for certain purposes of opening inner Earth portals to visit back and forth. And it was held there was a sword made to hold it, and it was held in the handle of the sword. But this was a very powerful tool. It held D5 frequency, and it held it and anchored it into density 1. And most people, unless they knew how to hold the man-out and could hold the man-out force alive and awake within them, you couldn't hold the sword for very long. If you tried to lift it up over your head, it would start to sing, and it would start to vibrate, and it would knock most people on their bottom. And we were being trained in how to slowly open the man-out force and stabilize it in our bodies, so we would be able to become at one with it. And if we became at one with it, it wouldn't throw us. We would be able to literally hold that power. And I remember lifting the sword up over my head, and it was big. It weighed more than I did. I mean, I was a little peanut, skinny little female in that lifetime. And I remember just feeling the mana move through me, and I was able to lift it up as if it was a feather. And it was in the middle of a thunderstorm on a beach, and it's like the waves were whipping up. It was a lake, and waves were whipping up, and big gusts of wind, and there was lightning all over the place. And I held it up over my head. And this was something we were warned by our teachers, never, 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 never do that, because the thing was a lightning rod. I mean, it drew energy in, and it could, it was known to have, fried quite a few people that thought they were too big for their britches and decided, oh, I can do that, and they couldn't. And I remember feeling the force of the man-out in me, the aliveness move through me, because my codes were starting to activate then. It was like the junior training round for, this time around. And I remember picking it up, and before the teacher could stop me, I lifted it up over my head, and I knew the bolt was coming. I just knew it, and a lightning bolt connected with it. And I felt this shift happen in my body. There was one moment, a window, where I knew I could have been fried instantly. I was going to be electrocuted. And then the mana did something, and I felt its presence come in. I became the mana, and I could feel it. It became me, I became it. That level of God's self opened up in me in that moment. And we became one with it, and we rode the bolt. It just, just like holding the sword. And this got me in so much trouble because I was a girl, and girls weren't supposed to be able to do that. Only the guys were supposed to be able to play with the lightning bolts and the swords. So this is some of the potential of working with the elements. I mean, being able to have lightning decide it was going to work with you instead of just fry your circuitry as it went through. This is the power that the Manau force within you has, because it is a co-resonant field. It is a field of love, or vibrational harmonization, that you will have with everything else that has the Manau in it. It is the God knowing the God, and there is no conflict in that space. This is the potential that's coming back now. I haven't seen Excalibur in years, so I don't think it's anywhere where we can use it these days. But this is the power we're going to start to begin to feel. We need to give ourselves permission to feel it too, because there have been so many abuses of power on this planet, and so many of us have got tripped up in the karmic loop of the victim-victimizer game, that when we think about, wow, that kind of power, where actually the elements would bend to our wishes. Wow. Some people go, ooh, do we deserve that? What if I mess up? Maybe I shouldn't have that much power. Maybe that's the only power that should be for gods and things. We've learned to be afraid of our own power because of the things that have happened on this planet. So we need to give ourselves permission. When we work with the Manau forces, we need to give ourselves permission to allow that to happen and to trust ourselves again. And if we trust, we will create good use of the Manau. But if we move into it afraid of ourselves, it will reflect it back to us. So it's a power that should be respected when we begin working with it, because it's a power that you can turn against yourself without meaning to. This is why when you work with any of the codes that, when we get into the manifestation sequence of the tones that I was talking about before, you want to be in a good space when you use these, or use them with the specific intent of getting you into your Krista space. You can use them to shift things if they're, not where you want them. But don't use them for see if I can make that happen. And don't ever use them to try to inflict your will on somebody else, even if it's for what you think is a good purpose. If you're inflicting your will on somebody else, you're going to create a Manau loop, which means what you send out comes back, but it comes back amplified. This is how this power works. if you look at it as a sea of Manau, that we're all actually parts of consciousness floating within that sea of Manau, it communicates with itself continually. Our thoughts come in and go back out, and they go out and they do stuff when they get out there, just like we're affected by the thought field that we're walking around in. So when we get into working with these powers, it's healthy to recognize from the beginning that they are powers. And it's also healthy to recognize that power is not an evil thing. There's a lot of belief systems on this planet that have taught us and reinforced, be afraid of power. You know, you're supposed to be sheep. Sheep don't have power. All right, only the shepherds can have power. Only the lords of the rays can know how to direct the rays. We're supposed to be the lords of the rays within ourselves. They don't tell us that. We need to realize that there's a responsibility that goes with it, but we're capable of it. To not be afraid of it, but to not treat it with less respect than it deserves, because the Manau itself will teach us that, nope, that's not the way to do it. You know? So anyway, when we move from where we had been, going through the oneness, you know, coming from the Manau down through the emanations of the Akasha with the primal substance units, into the all-oneness, and then into what I call the cosmic light bulbs and sound bites. This is talking about the unified field. The light bulbs and sound bites, that's an easy way to help people that you're going to teach, you know, that don't know much about this, how to remember it. The cosmic scalar grid, the unified field, the light bulbs that flash off and on and pulse consciousness into and out of manifestation. The consciousness takes on different types of characteristics, each having a different vibration, which gives it a different name. But it's still all the same consciousness, just manifesting itself in different ways. So you go into light bulbs and the sound bites. The sound bites would simply be, when we talk about part of Kai, part of K, and part of Come, when you have the flash on, you have light. When you have the flash off, you have vibration, or the silent sound. So the sound bites are the part of Come stage of the part of Kai phasing, when a thing is turned off, when the light bulb is off and just vibrating, and the turn on oscillation is the light, all right, is the light bulbs. Very simple way to get it across to people, because what you don't want to do, unless you want to give a master's course, then you like get out your Kathara manual and the other things and get into all the detail that's in there. Just get across the idea that you're dealing with templates of light and sound, but not just light and sound as we know it. Pre-light, the thing that comes before what we call light, and the thing that comes before what we know as sound. So they can understand that there's a level behind this. It's not just talking about this stuff we see and the things we hear, that there's more to this. You get that across, they'll be able to follow the rest. All right, now we go from the unified field and the tree of life and knowledge. This is where you take them into, very simply, the Kathara grid. All right, basic cosmic order stuff. You know, the Kathara grid. We can just stick that out. I'll whip through these really fast here in about, okay, I think, yeah. So you'll have these diagrams in the little packet, explain the Kathara grid. You can, you know, read what's on the diagrams to them, say, here, that's a Kathara grid. There are two of these. You have one that goes from the primal sound fields that begin with the original part of K, part of Kai, and part of Come, the original Mane, Manau, and Iri. And there's one set that comes down of 12, and then right where the number 1 is on that one, another set, the 12 on the set below it, would be there. Get that much across to them. They understand the basic template that we're working with. There are 24 points of primary focus, where what was once 1 that became 2 that became 3 has now become 24 points. These 24 points are going to set the patterns for the dimensional structure and for the breaking down and polarization of light and sound, or for the arrangement of part of Kai phasing, of how those light bulbs are going to flash off and on, how fast, how often, and at what angles in relation to each other. That's where the mathematical program of what keeps this consciousness in motion, what keeps this reality field where you can have a hologram in motion. It is the Kathara grids that hold the mathematical patterns. The mathematical patterns are called geomancies. They're the symbols that we use. So that's not too hard to get it across. Oh, that's a symbol, that's a geomancy. Oh, the geomancies are the things that are in the Kathara centers, right, that are holding the consciousness, that's holding the intention of keeping the manifestation framework in order. So the Kathara centers aren't just things, they're beings. Each of your Kathara centers is a part of your consciousness. Just like a symbol is a being, so are the Kathara centers. If you can get across when you're teaching these things that the structures you're teaching of are not just structures as we think of them in 3D out here, because we're taught to think of, inanimate objects, let's say, that have no life force. Therefore, they're not alive. Therefore, they're things, not beings. It's not recognized by the general scientific communities here, and we're not taught this from the time we're small like we should be, that energy is consciousness and consciousness is energy. Therefore, everything is a being. So if you can get across to people while you're teaching them about the basic structure, that you're talking about being structure as well as thing structure, it will help them to develop just the core of understanding, the seeds that they're going to need to really work with the Manau and the Ire and the Mane. Because these are forces of consciousness that require you to recognize that they are forces of consciousness before you will be able to successfully direct them to do much. If you enter it with an attitude of, I'm going to make it do this, you might get away with that for a while like the fallen angelics have, but it always creates a backdraft where it either makes it where you don't have the power to do it anymore, or it brings some things back to you to teach you not to. If we go in with the recognition that these are consciousness things, this is a relationship that requires etiquette. It requires basic manners, you know? This isn't an energy you're going to boss around. This is a friend you're going to say, wow, look at this. There's this Manau force of consciousness, a living conscious energy, part of God that gave itself specifically to me and to anybody else equally, without any judgment. It was a field of power. They said, you may use this to create, and you may create whatever you choose, unconditionally. It's a field of massive love. This is what this power is that we're going to work. The Manau is a love field. It is the strongest field of all of the other two, like all of them put together. If you take the Manau, that is the stronger one compared to either the Ire or the Mene, and it's also the strongest one compared to all the smaller currents that come out of any of those three. So we would go from basic Cathara grid to Cathara grid in the body. Say, here's where that structure anchors in your body, and you've seen these before in Cathara. These would be where the flash-on pattern, let's say, of where the primal light fields come in from the higher dimensional structure. I think I wanted to show this one first. Yeah, I should have shown that one before this one. Yeah, we'll put this right back on, but I won't put that one on. No, not that one, this one.
Oh, the other one.
You're fine. Thank you. Okay, yeah, you'd show them this, okay, before you show them the Cathara grid in the body. All right, just basic 15-dimensional structure. This one everybody probably just sees in their sleep at this point because it appears everywhere with all sorts of information on it depending on what we're teaching. Basic 15-dimensional structure. That is a symbol code right there that allows a certain set of frequencies that helps to convey the consciousness reality of what 15-dimensional structure is. It helps using this image. That's why we use it over and over. It's not hanging in the sky up there someplace. It is literally, this is part of the symbol structure, the mathematics that are embedded in our whole being down here in the dimensional fields. It's part of the mathematics. So we use this, let them see it. It shows the three-dimensional mind as well, the D3 mind. Simple structure to understand. We have here we have the triadic and polaric and acadic levels. These are the primal sound field levels. They're the vibration fields. They have certain names for their currents. And later you'll take them into learning that these are the Kundalini sound fields, primal sound fields. And then up here you have the 15, 14, and 13 primal light fields. And it actually starts at D13. That's the Manau level. We're going to learn a little bit more about the dimensional structure and how it works in relation to the Manau as we move through the radio body teachings. Because we're going to find out that D13 is something called 0 point. Now, there's a whole movement happening in physics in the scientific world called 0 point physics. It's a kind of I think a hybrid version of quantum theory, where they're getting into trying to find the 0 point. There's a lot of research being done into like monatomic particles and things like that, because there's a point where a thing can be accelerated. Its particles can be accelerated, and it can actually change its molecular content and disappear and turn into light. Scientists here are finding that. What they're not realizing is they have no idea where it went. And they don't know what it turned into when it got to the other side. Because what's happening right now, the way those things are being done, there's one part of the thing that if they're going to make let's say, an element disappear, they're beginning to be able to do that. But they're making a part of it go in one direction in reverse and a part of it go in the other direction, so they're fragmenting it. So they get two reduced versions of what it originally was. And I know that one of the motivations for this type of research is, well, first of all, if you can make stuff disappear, that's very handy military purposes, right? But what they really want to do, they know that time travel is possible, all right? And they know if they could figure out that key to how the elements work, that they could apply it to human molecules, and they could hopefully get themselves on the other side of wherever that disappearing was. What they don't realize is the way they're doing it, they don't want to do that, because they're literally separating the templates, and that's creating like a phantom self and and a forward self that are pulling energy away from each other, and eventually they drain each other until there's not enough energy to sustain either one of them. But when we get into learning about radio body a little bit more, we'll find that 0 point is very important. 0 point is the Manau point. This is where the Manau from up there that would be beyond this, like a layer beyond the 15-dimensional matrix and beyond the primal sound fields, it comes through in certain areas. Certain areas are concentrations of where the Manau comes through, certain are concentrations where the Ire comes through, and certain are concentrations where the Mane comes through. If we go back to the Cathara grid for a second, I'm going to go back to this one for a minute. I don't have the graph on this. No, I'll use this one first. Thanks, honey. I don't have the graph on, like the one that goes with this yet, because it was secondary, and I can still explain it to you. When you look at a Cathara grid, the paths of the currents would be, they'd all come through 12, which would be representative of the D12 divine blueprint, and then they split, and you end up with the Manau currents going down 12, 9, 6, 3, 1, and that's called the path of Amaraya. And you would have the Mane currents going down 12, 11, 8, 5, 2, and 1, and you would have the Ire currents going down 12, 10, 7, 4, 1. This is how the currents will run, and each level they break down, the vibration changes, so the name of the current changes. So what you end up with is a string of, what look like a string of names. And if you want to evoke and bring into activation in your body those particular currents of energy, you would choose which ones by their sound, by their vibration, and you would speak it. And that would allow it to go out into your hologram, bounce back in, and the breath literally carries it back into the template where it activates in the body. This is really the simple truth about radio body activation. The sound, and then tomorrow we're going to get into the physical movements that go with the sounds, which are the sariyas. Today we're going to do the sariya sons, which are the sound tones that go with them. And then tomorrow we'll learn to incorporate into that certain very simple body movements, but movements that go with the sounds. And then when we get really good at it, we'll combine those things with what we already know, some of us, and if you don't know them, you're going to learn these too, the salutations, which are the Merkaba spins. And what it looks like when you get good at it, when you're not good at it and you're first starting, it looks like somebody trying to figure out what was I supposed to sing while tripping over my feet, and where was what arm supposed to go in what direction. But after a while, as the currents begin to flow, you can actually feel an equilibrium happen, where it becomes a living dance, the dance for life and the dance of life. The Manau knows how to do this dance, so does the Ire and the Mane within you. So as you begin to do the rudimentary things, they'll start getting it open. You're retraining your body to be coordinated as far as handling these currents. But at least you're getting them into the body for the first time in a very, very long time. These currents haven't been running properly in the body for over 25,000 years, and much longer, actually. But the real damage was from 25,500 BC and forward. So if it's funny when you first start, if you end up starting when you're trying to put, especially when you're trying to put the exercises together, we'll start it easy. Today we're going to do the sounds, right? Tomorrow we'll have our sound sheet in case we decide we want to try that too. But then we'll just work on the movements, right? And then we'll have a break. And a little while later we'll go into the salutations, or getting our Merkaba spins right. And then we'll probably at that point get the symbol. The symbol and the spin's not too hard to do together. Okay? And then when you bring the sound in with the symbol and the spin, you've added one more piece of balance to the whole thing. And the last one would be learning how to spin while dancing. You know? And I'm afraid to look at this. I remember little Kodak moments where I used to be good at this in the ancient of days when they started us, when we were like this high. It's interesting to learn it when you're not that high anymore, and your body has no idea how to do it anymore. So if you feel silly and funny when you start to work with these, realize that that's okay, first of all. It's not just you. These bodies are like it reminds me of the Tin Man in The Wizard of Oz. Need oil, talking around. when we first start to work with the technologies, we're giving the oil to the body. We're getting the currents back into the body. And slowly, if we practice, we will begin to balance those currents in the body where they're not just running and kind of feeling funny and we're trying to figure out what to do with ourselves, where they start to take on a flow, a grace, and a balance. And we'll find there's a still point within all that, where you actually, what happens when you get really good at combining all of those factors together. In the ancient days, when the Iyani, and now in the inner earth, when the Iyani do these things, because they do rounds and those kind of things, and they incorporate all of these technologies into their rounds, so they do very, very powerful rounds for all sorts of purposes. You get to a point where you can spin so quickly, and all of the movements come so automatically, kind of like driving. You know, if you've driven for about 10 years, you just get in and you can't even remember if you put the keys in because they're already in there because you're just on autopilot and you just do it. It becomes so natural that they can do this and they can be at really high speeds of motion, but they perceive everything, including themselves, as being completely still. They become one with the still point. And everything just moves around them and they don't see it as moving. They simply see the hologram of existence, and they can see past sound barriers and past light barriers and past time barriers. There's a space of full at-one-ment that can be found in the exercises, and they would do these, and they teach their little kids how to do these things just for basic maintenance of, you know, keeping your circuits oiled while you're in a manifest form. If you're going to be on a planet in a manifest form, these are the things that will allow you to keep your form at its best form and to keep your consciousness clearest. This is what the breatharians used to do to live. They didn't have to eat other things. They didn't have internal organs in the same way we do because they didn't need to process foods and things in that way. They simply breathed and danced. They did the dance of life and of love and of freedom and of joy all the time. So we're not going to be great at it when we first start. That's okay. Don't be embarrassed. Don't worry about the fact that you're with a group of people and somebody might see me, you know, fall, or I can't remember what the line was. I have to go find my paper. That's okay. Those things are okay. Give yourself permission for it. And when you go home with the technologies, you have a choice. You can put them in a drawer, and they'll sit there, and your mana force will stay sleeping. It's with you all the time, but it will stay sleeping. Or you can decide, this is worth it. Let's see how far I can go. And this is only step 1. What might step 20 be like? You know, if I can make step 1 work, I might be able to get to step 2. And if I get to step 2, I can probably get to step 20. What all of this will culminate into is the ability to build the Akasha Merkaba, which is the one that can sustain. It's, here in this system, it would be in the 12 dimensions of this system, it would be a D12 Merkaba. That is called the Mahanta Merkaba, an Avatar's Merkaba. It's called the Akasha Merkaba because it incorporates not just the frequencies of here in parallel, like a regular Merkaba would. It incorporates the frequencies of the inner Earth time cycle as well. So it would allow a person who could fully activate that to pass that back and forth between the portals from here to inner Earth. And it would also allow you to disappear and reappear at will. You could go into full light and stay there if you wanted to. It's kind of funny. It's like when you know you can turn yourself, you can manifest and demanifest at will, right? Whether or not you have enough money to buy a house so you have some place to put your body does not become one of your main concerns anymore. It becomes insignificant. If I don't need it right now, I'll turn it into light and just hang out that way. And then when I need it again, I'll pop it back in, right? This is some of the things that masters do. They pop in and out of realities. They spend most of their time in pure consciousness as the man-out. But they know that at any time they can pop in and out. They can say, I sense that reality field over there. If I want to see it in holographic form, externalized from me, because I am at one with it, I will project myself in. And they will do the things with their fields. They will use the vibrations of thought that will create the same effect that we do when we do the tones. And they will activate their Merkaba in a certain way to put themselves where they want to go. This is the beginning of those kind of levels of mastery. Okay, I'm going to put the other. Yeah, I'll put that one. Yeah, that one's good. Now, when you're teaching this, you go from showing them 15-dimensional system, that's the basic structure, you know, and letting them know that that's the template that these primal forces of consciousness are, you know, form as they come into manifestation. This is the structure that they form. They form the Gathara grids, they form the 15-dimensional system, and then they form in the bodies, in our physical bodies, we have a Cathara grid as well, because Cathara grids, remember, are the core template mathematical blueprint of everything in the time matrices. That mathematical blueprint was the original thought that was held in the Manau as far as how the Manau would organize itself and its relationships with itself in energy terms to create a specific type of reality field. The reality field that this time matrix was founded on was being able to have a three-dimensional holographic experience. It was a three-dimensional hologram. There are others that don't have three dimensions. They're built on different mathematics, and they only have two dimensions, where you don't get physical externalization in the same way. But in this particular system, three-dimensionality was the intended choice that Source chose when it externalized itself as the Manau that manifested this time matrix. So you simply explain to them that the biggest things and the smallest things all through the universe all are built in this core template. Every ant, every microbe, every cell, and every planet, every galaxy, every cosmos follows the basic pattern of the 12 and the 12. And the 0 point happens where in the Cathara grid you have 12 connects with 1 of the next grid going up. Remember, I said that there's this 1 and then there's another one. That takes you from dimension 1 to dimension 12. Then there's one that starts at 12, where number 1 would be there, and goes up into the primal light fields and primal sound fields. That forms D13, 14, and 15. Primal sound fields would be the same thing as these down here, but on the next level up. And these are the currents, these are the paths that the Manau and the Ire and the Mane follow as they break themselves and polarize their consciousness down into smaller units. It's like making children of themselves as they work their way down. And what they do is, when they're turned on in the body, the primal light fields flash on in this pattern. They have the main one coming down. This would be the Mane coming down from the central pillar. You have the Manau coming down this way. And actually right now they cross over at D5. This would be a little bit different configuration depending on the time frame you were born in. When the second seeding of humanity was seeded here 3 million years ago, I think it's when they were seeded here, came this way, and it actually crossed through all of the crossbars, and the Ire did also. But there had been damage to the planetary grids and to the galactic grids that there was a bypass system made through the fifth dimensional frequencies. So this is the pattern that when we activate our higher frequencies that allow the Kirishe, primal light fields, to come through, that's the pattern they'll follow right now. That pattern won't change because right now it's being held literally in the galactic shields, which are the ones that control the sun and the other planets in the star system. So some things you work with instead of trying to fix and make it perfect. You work with what's there because it's too large of a shift that would cause too much damage. We can't use the Manau right now to try to change this back to what it originally was, because if we do that, we would actually create a reaction where it had to destroy itself in order to recreate itself. So right now, this is the pattern of the flow lines, and I call them flow lines because this is where the consciousness comes in, where it comes into your body, but it doesn't flow like water. It flashes on and off. It's as if this image turned on and off in your body, not as if something was poured down and came down this way. So it's literally a flashing on and off of these frequencies in the body, like turning on and off a light switch. So you can basically get people to where they understand they have a Cathara grid in their body. These are the basic paths that the Kirishe D13, 14, and 15 currents will flow. And when we move into understanding more about the radial body, we'll start to understand more about what that structure is up above them, the primal sound fields, and what they have to do with things. Because these are the heart and soul of where the primal forces come from. They don't come from this universe down here. They don't come from D12 and down. They're there, but that's not where they originate. They originate at the top of the other Cathara grid. So we'll be getting into a little bit of what that structure is. Let's see what's next. Okay. Just do shields really quick. Yeah. You would want to show them just basically how they have their Cathara grid and the shields. So they're familiar with the scalar templates. Remember, Parta K, Parta Chi, Parta Cum, which are made out of the forces, the Manau, Ire, and Mane. And our personal ones form, I have to say it fast, our personal bodies form on the shields, or the scalar shields that are our template. We have our Maharic shield at density 4, that's our dimension 12, 11, and 10 level self. We have our Turic shield at density 3, dimensions 7, 8, and 9. We have our Doradic shield at density 2, dimensions 4, 5, and 6. And we have our telluric shield, or our elemental shield, at dimensions 1, 2, and 3. These are the scalar templates that hold our consciousness into the proper pulsation rhythms that allow us to be a part of this particular reality field down here. The pulsation rhythm of consciousness is that Partakai phasing rhythm that's held in the mathematical patterns of the Cathara grids, of the geomancies. It's the pulsation of the primal force currents. How fast they will pulse in will determine where you end up. At what angle they pulse toward each other will also determine where you end up in space-time. So the pulsations of consciousness, if we can understand that the fact right now that we're sitting here means there's a very specific pattern of pulsation of consciousness that every one of us are sharing. In a whole unified field of all sorts of scalar wave patterns, not moving at all, standing still, but just going on and off, we're perceiving movement and massive cycles of linear time because we're simply following a certain set of flashes. The consciousness is flashing on and off and perceiving one moment, then the next, then the next, then the next, but really all the moments are there at once. It helps to get this across to people just so they have an understanding of simultaneous time, because it will help when they start asking questions about why am I remembering some strange things about when I used to be somebody else and I didn't believe in reincarnation. Then you have the question of, oh boy, do I get into this with them about reincarnation or don't I? Because it can be confusing if you try to explain to somebody, well, not only you're trying to get them to understand that they reincarnate, but they're all here now. What do you mean they're all here now? I remember dying. Well, you were tapping into the now point where that one did die. What? You know, it gets very confusing. But if you can help them understand the flash lines from the beginning, that's why I mentioned before, if when you're starting to talk about Partakai, Partake, and Partakam, and pulses of consciousness that are flashing them on and off, to get across the idea of flash lines, it will help you to get across the idea of time when you're trying to teach that to somebody. If you're trying to teach them that time is simultaneous, okay, well, how come I don't see it simultaneous? How come I only see this? Because your consciousness is following one of those flash lines. But there's parts of you that are following all these other flash lines all at the same time. And each of you are perceiving your own set of three-dimensional hologram. The hologram isn't really there. All it's really there is a pulsation of consciousness that's happening at certain angles to itself. So it literally bounces consciousness out and brings it back again, and it sees an externalization of its contents, just like you would see an image on a movie screen, because there is a film and there is a beam of light run through the projector. The consciousness works. The Manet works like the beam of light that runs through the projector. The Manet, the Manal and the Ire together work as a template. So together we have the projector machine and the film, and our conscious thoughts are what imbue the Manal with what's going to be on that film. And it happens all the time, whether we're in control of our thought patterns or whether they're running on autopilot because somebody else is messing with them from the D2 level or we don't know how to do it anymore. We're still doing the creating. And we're doing it by embedding ideas into the Manal field. And the Manal field creates them there as vibration, and then the Manet projects them outward into hologram. We're going to get into the series of the in-breath and the out-breath and the pause breath, because there are certain tones you use to bring the thing you would like to manifest in. They're the embedding tones that would bring them back in, the Ire tones. The Ire is the in-breath. It would take it back in, out of manifestation, through you, and into the Manal. The Manal is the receiver. It says, okay, I'll take that. Oh, this is what you want to manifest? Okay. Puts it into a vibration, and that vibration goes back out on the Manet current, and the Manet takes it into its light expression of that vibration, which is the hologram. So this is the thought process. It's these currents and these primal forces that are these are the juice that runs through the structure that we learned before. This is the juice, the power that makes it work, that makes it happen. It's the power of consciousness. Okay, moving on to the next, please. No, we don't know that one. They know that one enough. Yeah. And I would suggest, everybody here has done Cathara once. Yes, please. Yeah. Is that, no? Okay. If there's people who haven't done Cathara, I would suggest reading it, because you will learn a lot more about, like, the body parts and the body structures. And I'm not going to, this isn't a Cathara class, so I'm not going to go deeply into those. I'm going to show you enough, like if you haven't seen anything, I'll show you enough where you know these diagrams exist, and you know you're probably going to have to look at them a little better, understand how all the pieces fit together. The Cathara book, the Cathara manual, is like a how-to for the human body. So it is worth it, even if you don't want to do healing. It's worth it just to get the rundown on the more specific detail on all the things that we're talking about here. And then you will be able to understand what we're going to go into with the radial body even more. So I would suggest, if you haven't done Kathara, to at least get the manual and read it and find out what these parts are about. You'll have these charts, and these are the same ones that are in Kathara. They will be in whatever size chart pack we end up with by the end of tomorrow. And so you will have them there. If you don't have the book, you will have a copy of these. But there's a lot more explanation in the Kathara book. It's 200 and some pages, and there's a lot more explanation on how all these systems work. So, and that's only level 1 Kathara, but it's worth getting just for the anatomy course. This is I'm going to show you this because this one most of you have seen if you've seen Kathara or the Templar manual, because these are in the Templar manual too. This is the auric field levels. Each of the auric field levels corresponds to one of the dimensions. This shows 12 of them. It doesn't show the light fields that go out beyond them. This is really part of the reality of what the radial body is. The radial body is the body that radiates. Okay? That's why it's called radial. It radiates energy, frequency. It radiates all these different currents. What's fascinating is when we get to see how every one of those currents are actually woven in to every cell. So every being is actually a weaving of light and sound that's composed of not just the 12-dimensional frequencies, but also the ones that are higher. Right now, those currents are turned off in our bodies, and what we're going to be doing is progressively turning them back on and bringing our at-one-ment back. So these, I'm just showing you here, and you can show the people that you're teaching, these are what are called the auric field levels. Each three-dimensional layer of them is called a huva body, which means a three-dimensional light-sound grid, okay, or body. These are actually formed by what we'll talk about later, which are Merkaba fields. Okay, Merkaba fields are spiraling counter-rotating fields of electromagnetic energy that form at the center of them an egg-shaped energy field, which is called a form constant. It is that space inside the Merkaba field that becomes these eggs that are around all of creation. Now, every universe, every three-dimensional universe, literally is a spherical, elliptical sphere-shaped set of eggs that has all the different dimensional levels that correspond to that particular field, like density 1. We call density 1, dimensions 1, 2, and 3. That has a bubble of energy. It has 3 of them, one for D1, one for D2, one for D3. And altogether, that's called one Huva body, and that's the Nada Huva body, the one that goes with density 1. You have the Alpha Huva body in density 2. You have the Beta Huva body in density 3. You have the Mahara Huva body in density 4. And you have the Raja Huva body in density 5. That's the primal light fields. Then you have other things that are a little bit different, but they're Huva bodies, but they're structured different on the primal sound currents. So these are basic structures. Teach them about these eggs that they're walking around in. Because you need to understand the eggs to understand how to work with the radio body and with the currents. Because it's not just around the outside of your body that these fields exist, but every atom in your body has a field like this. And there are very, very specific types of particles that form each level that correspond directly to each of the primary, what are called rays, or the 15 rays. So as we learn radial body, we start with understanding we have an auric field, and it has all these dimensional levels. 12 of them are shown here. The auric field levels correspond directly to the chakras, which are the little energy vortices that run energy back and forth through the body. Okay, we'll go on to the next one. Yeah, okay, I can go there. Yeah. Now, we go back to the currents. Okay, we have, now here's where we're beginning to build the understanding of, okay, where does radial body fit in? You've got, we've talked about dimensions, we've talked about the 15-dimensional matrix, we've talked about the Kathara grid in the body, how it starts to build up and how it forms these eggs of energy around us. We've also mentioned that there's a Merkaba that we haven't shown any pictures of yet, but there's a Merkaba that forms these eggs around the bodies. Now, we're taking egg-shaped structures that happen because primal life force currents are flowing into the bodies through the Merkaba fields. Primal life force currents are the different types of currents that the Mana, the Ire, and the Mane break themselves down into becoming. So the primal currents that form everything are alive. They are currents of consciousness, but they are also currents of energy. and particles and subatomic particles and these kind of things. Okay? So if you can show people, you have your bodies around you, and these are the primal life force currents, the basics of them. These are the ones we learned before, and then we're going to see how these break down even further as far as what is the consciousness. Who is the consciousness that each of these rays carry? This is what we're going to find out with the radial body stuff. So here you have your 15-dimensional matrix again. You have, see up at the top, do I need that? No. Okay. You have at the top here, this whole area around here, the Akadic. If you looked at this as source, okay, or this is the Manaw, or the source, or the beginning point, this would be the first level closest to source. This would be the next level away from source. This would be the next level away from source. And these go all the way around. Now, away simply means stepping down, okay, in vibration, because they're all in source. You can't go away from source. You are source. You're made of source. You live in source. That'll never change. But we have these areas of the primal sound field around us. They form a current of energy that doesn't pour this way. It flashes on at different intervals if the body is open to receive it. That's called the Kundalini, primal sound field. We get into the D13, 14, and 15, primal light fields. That's called density 5. That's the first level of density. That is what would be, the closest you could compare it to would be a gaseous form of antimatter. Not antimatter, but antimatter. So it's like the beginning of where consciousness that was sound vibration begins to move into light expansion. This has to do with certain dynamics that take place up there in relation to the Manaw void and the Ire and the Mane interacting with each other, which we get into a little bit more when we go into radial body. But it helps to understand before you go into radial body that you have the auric field around you, the Huva bodies around you, that you have these currents that are coming through. This is a pillar. This is the pillar that you're building. As you work with these activations, you're progressively putting back together this frequency pillar that you will literally be in the middle of. It will be running right through you once you get the full thing activated. Usually people start down here and they activate this, and then this, and then this, and it takes them many cycles of lifetimes to go through each of these, but they're all happening at the same time, so it really doesn't take that long if you look at it that way from the avatar perspective. If you realize you're doing them all at once, it's like going to 4 different colleges all at the same time. So it really didn't take it that long. Right? In fact, when you get to that point, there is no such thing as long or short, because time doesn't mean the same thing as it does to you when you're down here in a linear fashion. But we're building this pillar of light. This is the normal pillar of light and sound. And it's not just a pillar of light and sound. It's a pillar of consciousness. This is the stream of consciousness. This is where your consciousness comes from. You wouldn't be conscious if you didn't have some of this flowing. Everything has some of this flowing, or it wouldn't be manifest at all. Now, you have the different, this is the beginning of understanding the sound tones that go with the primal currents. We have the Kundare. Now, Kundare are the different sound fields, the actually 3 levels, the triadic, polaric, and Akadic. The Ku sound is the triadic, the Da sound is the polaric, and the Re sound is the Akadic level. So that's where we get these words. They're not just words somebody sat down and made up. They have to do with the translation of the actual vibrations. When you take those vibrations and bring them down here, which means they change, because it would be a different sound when you were up there. But to get that sound down here in a way that you could use it to bring that sound and that frequency into your body, those would be the sound tones you would use. Now, here we have the Ki Rashe for the primal light fields. Here, the D13 Ki, the D14 Ra, and the D15 She. And some of them are very similar. Some of them will have like the Ra or the Re or the Sha or the She. And there's a difference in vibration with them. Okay? Here we have the Maharata, which is the Christos liquid light field, and that's dimensions 10, 11, and 12. That's your divine pre-matter blueprint. That's where it's a liquid light pre-matter blueprint. It's called hydroplasm. And that's the beginning of where your consciousness begins to take its form out of just a gaseous thought form, out of just a sound vibration idea form, into the expression of dimensionality in holographic matter. You begin to pick up dimensionality as your consciousness moves into manifestation through this structure. Now, you have the Antankarana is a word, a big one, that's used to describe the pillar, this particular pillar of 9 dimensions of energy, dimensions 1 up through dimensions 9. They're called the universal Kundalini currents. So when you hear people talk about Kundalini, this is the part of the divine pillar or stream of consciousness that they're talking about. Now, each level of these, each dimensional level has a different name, and it's made of a different type of particle or subatomic particle unit. And this is what we begin to understand when we work with radio body, because once we understand the particles that these rays of consciousness are taking, we begin to see where things, like the particles our scientists tell us we're made out of, where they connect to this picture. We begin to understand what is in our cells and what frequency is running where, and what are these little things called atoms in our bodies, and what do they really do. Because these are the windows that the currents flow through to bring the body into manifestation. And if those windows are dirty or if they're blocked, you're going to get a distorted manifestation. That's what's been happening here for a very long time. That's what radio body, working with radio body, will do, is clear that. The Vecca codes will progressively restore the natural radio body, the natural sound tones and light frequencies of the primal currents and the primal forces as they run through you. And progressively your hologram will start to clean itself up. It won't have dirty windows anymore, or blocked ones. Okay, next one. Am I talking fast, or is it just me? I'm getting on a roll again. Uh-oh. Yeah, actually, no, that would be second. I would do that one first, yeah. Okay. All right. Now, this is where you would go from what you all would probably know from Cathar or from Templar or something. If you're going to teach Dance of Life, you would go from helping people understand they have the primal currents running through them, they have the egg-shaped bodies around them. Now you put those two together, and the next level to learn about is what's called the tissue capsule that surrounds the auric field levels. Every three-dimensional level, actually every dimensional level, has a little radial body around it, but a full radial body is around each three-dimensional level. And by the time we get done discussing radio body, we're going to find out an amazing thing. And this, it kind of dawned on me, like the pieces came together. My mind knew it, but I hadn't integrated what it quite meant yet. That hit me today. When we come to understanding radio body and its relationship to our anatomy and our higher parts of identity and our soul body and our oversoul body, who are on Tara and on Gaia or in the other harmonic universes, it ends up that the radial body that we're walking around inside, we're going to learn about the radial bodies that are around our atoms first. They're the ones we need to learn to direct first. But we have the one around the first three-dimensional levels of our auric field. What that radial body is the same thing. Imagine yourself having a density 2 body that's much bigger than this one. And just like we have little radial bodies around our atoms, the radial body around us here is the radial body around our bigger selves, atoms. We're walking around inside our soul bodies, and our soul bodies have manifest form in that level of density. It's like, how far away is your soul body? Not far at all. You're walking around in its atoms. And where is the one that we're going to be working with directly? Now, we can look at the radial body as a capsule of light and sound energy made of specific types of frequencies. These are going to be the frequencies that come out of the breaking down or the downstepping of the Manau, the Ire, and the Mane. The radial body has a different type of particle energy than does, say, the physical body. But it is just as tangible and just as real. All right, now, with the radial body, there are basically 5 levels of the radial body. One main one would surround each level of your 5 harmonic system. As you have your 3-dimensional self down here, your incarnate identity, your soul in density 2, your oversoul in density 3, your avatar in density 4, and your rishi level of self in density 5. These parts of your own identity would have their own radial body capsule around them, and you would also, each level of them would have their own, around the molecules that they're made of, the cells that they're made out of, would each have their own microcosmic version of the radial bodies. In order to get from density 1 to density 2, if we wanted to go to visit Tara in density 2 and pop out of Earth, which means we'd activate our Merkaba fields, but we would do it, and if we were able to activate our Merkaba fields to do it, what this would allow to happen was the radial body capsule that's separating density 1 and density 2 would dissolve. So you could pass through and expand through the barrier. It's almost like if we imagine ourselves nestled in the cells of our larger body, the Santara. When we activate Merkaba and things are going the right way, that radio body expands. It dissolves from what it is, and we just expand out and become that body. The body's already there. I get tongue-tied, I get brain-tied with some of this. When I think of, ooh, what does that mean? What are the potentials that come out of understanding some of this? Because you could take this really, really far. What does this mean about what you could possibly do with yourself? It means all sorts of things. But the first step, I mean, I can't even speculate right now. I'm just learning how the radio body works, how it plugs into the atoms, and how we can learn to work with it. But what does that mean we can really do with our consciousness? It means it's limitless. It means there's all sorts of things that we can't even imagine right now we'd be able to do, or at least I can't imagine them right now. But the first part comes in being able to understand that we have a radio body. It's the radiating fields of energy and life force around and within us that is the radio body. And it takes the primary form of a tissue capsule around the auric field and also little energy capsules around all of the atoms in the body. Now, the radio body isn't just the tissue capsule. It's also what's contained inside of it. The stuff inside of the radio body that forms our three-dimensional body, that forms the consciousness of our consciousness in 3D, that forms the particles that our bodies are made out of. These are formed because the radio body forms first. So the radio body is the first part of, when I talked about the Merkaba fields that form at their center, the egg-shaped things, the first egg-shaped things they form are the radio bodies out of the particles that are from the higher dimensional fields. The radio body is a pre-light, pre-sound body. And from that, and within it, are where the other levels of the currents come in, the dimensionalized currents come in to build up the forms that we know. Now, let me see. The transduction sequence. Oh boy, here we go. Okay. Now there's paperwork. So if some of you bought the supplement to this book, you have these graphs, this much of these graphs in them, and there's paperwork that goes with it. I'm going to give you guys that, there's like part of the workshop. I'm not going to give the whole thing that's in there, but the ones that pertain to this, you will get the paperwork. That was given in Calgary. I will put it in that for tomorrow, so you will be able to read more, and it helps to read more, like on the transduction sequence, because there's a detailed piece, several pages long, that gets into it, explaining exactly how this works, and this does this, and this does this. You don't need to have that much detail to learn to work with your radio body. I'm not going to go into that much detail here, because by the time I get done with that much detail, you guys will be so tired, and I'll be so tired, that we won't get a chance to do the stuff that's fun, which is begin to work with the technologies of the radio body. But the knowledge is there, it's in written form, and it will be in the chart packs that you get to go home with. Now, the radio body, most important thing to understand, first of all, is, get a pointer here, is this little diagram up here shows one Huva body, okay? Now the Huva body, remember, is a three-dimensional capsule, three-dimensional light sound body that we're walking around in, and the radio body, at first, we're going to understand the radio body as the capsule that surrounds it, okay, that separates it from the next three-dimensional levels of energy. Okay, there's the outer thing that looks like a starburst, that's one level of the radio body. There's a trion. I remember we said there are 5 levels. You have 5 radio body levels for each of the harmonic universes going up. This is just one of those. Okay, this diagram pertains to one of those. The outer level is called a trion field. And the inner level is called a miyaj field, because it's made of things called mijans. And the trion field is made of things called trions. Now, these aren't the only particles, but here's where we begin to get into the types of particles and subatomic units that the consciousness of the Mane, Manau, and Ere take on as they come down and downstep into manifestation. By the time we get done with the information that we have here, we will see that there's a whole bunch of particles. And if you take an electron here, and you take it up to density 2, it's called something else. But it's the same thing there as an electron is here. If you take it up to density 3, it has another name. But it's the same thing in density 3. There's a progression of units of energy. Each one of them is part of a specific current of primal life force consciousness that came out of the original 3. And each of these form a different layer of the radial body. This one, and also the ones in your cells, literally within your atoms. So as we begin to learn about our auric field out here, in the capsule here, what we're really learning about is the same thing, microcosmically, going into our body cells. And there's one diagram, when I get to it, you'll see why I was late this morning, probably. I tried to put as much information on the one diagram that you'll be able to read it and play with it for a while, where there's enough there where you can get it. You can see what your atom is doing. You can see where these currents are in your atoms. You can know the names of them, and that alone will be very empowering, because all of a sudden you know what's happening in your atoms. You know where your Manow current is. You know what currents are shut off, and you know what needs to be done to turn them back on. It's as simple as that. If you know where the problem in the wiring is, and you know anything about wiring, you go in, you fix the problem, and the juices can be turned back on again. That's all we're doing. So you have the radial body around this way. You have the radial body around the atoms in your body as well. And there are different layers of the Huva bodies that form because of the first layers of the radial body that set the circular formation for them. The radial bodies form because of the Merkaba fields, the spiraling counter-rotating fields of electromagnetic energy. Now those spiraling fields are created by different rhythms, very specifically organized and synchronized rhythms of Partakai phasing, flashline sequences, control how fast and at what sequence different pulses of consciousness will move, and it creates a circulation system. So Merkaba fields are the circulation system by which the primal consciousness comes down through, turns into primal currents, and comes down in to form the radial body, and then the manifest holographic body and the consciousness in it, down in the dimensional fields. All right, now, let me see. Down here, this particular diagram shows, we start with primal life force currents, Partakai units, all right? They'd be these little guys here. Okay, over in here. The Partakai and the Partakai units. We start with Partakai, they become Partakai and Partakam. These go into 3D Partakai grids, Kilon grids, okay? Thought field grids. All right, so you have your primal units, your scalar standing waves that form from Partakai, Partakai, and Partakam. You have here these crystallizing, building up and forming more complex scalar wave patterns that become kilons. A kilon is a set of 3 Partakai flash lines that intersect at different angles. That's where you get 3-dimensionality from, because you have 3 actual single dimensions crossing through each other and bending the frequency of consciousness, bending the consciousness pulses at very specific angles to each other. This is what allows the consciousness to perceive the outward manifestation of the hologram. So we go from Partakai, Partakai, Partakam into kilons, or little crystallized 3-dimensional forms of standing scalar waves. These go next into Merkaba fields. All right, they form, these kilons are continually pulsing consciousness and energy, and because of the repeated sequences of pulsing, there is actually what appears to be spirals of energy. They're actually just flash lines. They're flashing pulses of energy, but 3-dimensional flashing pulses of energy that form Merkaba fields. Inside of the Merkaba fields is where these, what were flat, what were not even manifest, frequencies of consciousness begin to interface with each other. That creates the bubble of energy that is the radial body, and inside of that bubble the Huva bodies are created, and inside of that the things that we call matter particles that form our D1 level of physical body, our D2 level of emotional body and elemental body, and our D3 mental body levels. See, every level of your identity really just has its physical, it has its emotional elemental, and it has its mental body level. You have it on density 1, you have it on density 2, 3, 4, and 5, all the way up. So really we're only dealing with a 3-body system on each level. And if you want to be in your soul body, it's not that your soul is that much higher, it's having this body, but moved up a harmonic where there's more frequencies running through each of those 3 levels. So this is the process by which Partakai units crystallize, come down into kilons. Those kilons, because of the flashing, the angles that they are intersecting with each other, their flash lines or pulses of consciousness are intersecting with each other, form Merkaba fields. The Merkaba fields come down and form the kilons in our DNA templates. These begin to take the form of the Cathara grids. The Cathara grids with those first of all, 24 points of frequency, they fill out to more complex things. That's where we get the shields. All right, the catharogrids are the first primary 12, and then 12, 24 points of frequency. In the manifest part, the part that comes from the D12 Divine Blueprint, this is where you have those 12 points begin to accrete or pull up from the Manau more of a similar type of mathematical program. So you're bringing more scalar waves into manifestation. This is how your shields are formed. We talk about the scalar template shields that each level, three-dimensional level of the body is built on. This is how they're formed. These come through, and here's where we get into Trion and Meson electrostatic units. These work differently than usual negative or positive electrically charged particles do here. They have different properties in relation to density 1 because they are particles that have to do with the other densities. When we first introduced radio body, we only dealt with trions, myons, and dions. That was the beginning of our education, oh boy. The graph that I'll show you that I did last night gives a whole list of them. Each one, I think, creates 3. Okay, so like the Manau would have its set of breakdowns going all the way down the dimensional scale, and you would have the same thing with the Ire and the same thing with the Manet, and I'll show you what they are in a minute. But from this area of radial body, let's say these are the radial body electrostatic units that form the light sound field around your bodies and around your atoms. These are lenses. They work like lenses that break down the frequencies that are incoming, like the frequencies of consciousness, the pulses of consciousness that are incoming. They further break them down and polarize them. They bring them into what's called the DNA template. They literally form. They take the mathematical program that was originally stored in the consciousness units, passed all the way down through the catharogrid and down into the Merkaba field, down into the DNA template, brings it now into the manifest DNA. This is where you begin to make the switch over from what are considered invisible things, that scientists don't believe they're there, to visible things like chemicals, like atoms and molecules and subatomic particles. The trion Miage field is another word for the radial body. That is they are the primary elements. There are 3 elements. There's the trion field, the Miage field, and around it, the Rheon field. The Rheon field is the Manau field. The trion field is the Manet field. And the Miage field is the Ire field. These are the particles that those rays of consciousness break down to form the bodies around us, to literally hold our consciousness in manifestation. Okay. That's not that important, really. I hope not. This is much easier to read, by the way. Like, at a slower pace where you have the written text, because you can stop and say, wait a minute, what? Oh, okay, and go on to the next paragraph. And it's not really hard. Some of the stuff in Cathara is actually harder to read than that, than this stuff is. And you will have a copy of this in the things for tomorrow, as long as Kinko's cooperates. Because we have to get the Kinko's to get them made. Now, what's useful in beginning to understand all of this stuff about radial body, yeah, I think so, yeah. This is called the transduction sequence. All right, now this chart is the transduction sequence in what's called the miasmic body. We won't talk about the miasmic body first. We'll talk about that second, because that's something that shouldn't be there that is. But the transduction sequence is the natural process by which consciousness goes from being the no thing of the ever-existing eternal God into being manifest in individuated form in a three-dimensional reality hologram. This is the process. It goes from, now this is before we got into talking about the levels that are up higher than this, all right? This is where you hit the Cathara grid level. All right, now remember, we've already talked about before that, because we introduced the forces this time. Before you'd even get to the Cathara grid level, you have the Akasha. You have the void, the light and the sound. You have the Manau, the Manet, and the Ire. So that's where, that's the consciousness, the pulses of consciousness that become the primal life force currents that are going to come down and move through this. That's where they start, at that Godhead, if you want to call it. I don't like that word, though. It's like not God's seed, because the seed is really the Ire. And it's not the spark, because the spark is the Manet. It's the no thing. It's the, what is it perhaps, as they used to, there used to be, the word manna used to be used in, I think it was Hebrew, I think it was Hebrew translation for what is it? It's the what is it? Is it Hawaiian too? All right. Well, but usually that's applied to the mané. But the manu, I don't. You can look at it as the top, whatever you want to call it. God seed, God spark, whatever. It's all of those rolled into one. You can call it the void, but that kind of makes it seem lacking. The whole thing together would be the monad. All right, and the monad manifests at different places. Like it's actually the akasha taken down at a couple of different octaves where it's anchoring to break down the frequencies into becoming the rays. So the monad starts up there. You could look at the akasha, the whole akasha, as the monad, and then there's little monads that come down off of that. But if you're looking for a word, what do you call that manau? The God spirit. You have the God egg, the God seed, the ire. You have the God spark, the God fire, the light, the mane. This is the God spirit. This is the first thing that created the other two. That's the best way I can describe it. Anyway, we have that happening up there, out there, through there, somewhere in here. We have